Well, hi, everyone. It is so exciting to be here today. I have a great program lined up for you. We are going to talk about decorative stitching, particularly decorative stitching in machine embroidery mode. So let's just wait a few minutes while some other people get connected. I don't know how many people are on the call already. Okay, we've got some people who are already logged in, so that is very exciting. What we're going to talk, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about decorative stitches in sewing mode because, so many of us have, and I myself included at the beginning, we buy an embroidery machine or we buy a sewing machine and we get all excited because all these decorative stitches, but then we'd end up not using them or not knowing how to use them. So even though the topic today is decorative stitches in embroidery mode, I am going to take a few minutes at the beginning and I am going to talk about decorative stitches just in sewing mode. And I have some samples that I'm going to share with you because I think it's important. I want you to be inspired that the next time that you sit down, whether you're doing applique, you're decorating a garment or whatever, that you're going to say, you know what? I'm going to try a different stitch. So that is how we're going to get started today. And so then we're going to move over and we're going to talk about how to use decorative stitches in embroidery mode. All right, so we've got lots of people on the call. So I have Amy in the background, and Amy is going to be looking through the comments and questions. So if you do have questions or comments, feel free to type them into the, I guess it's called the chat or whatever it is. And then Amy will stop and ask me those questions. And so hopefully I'll be able to answer all of your questions today. All right, so what we're going to do is I am looking at two machines. So as I mentioned, I'll be using the Husqvarna Viking Designer Epic 3 for the embroidery machine. And then I am going to work also, or not work, but I'm just going to show you our new entry-level sewing machine, which is the Husqvarna Viking Onyx 30. All right. But before we do that, I'm going to show you some samples of things that you can do with decorative stitches in sewing only mode. All right, so here, this is a really good example. This is cork. So it's a table runner. You can't see the whole thing because there just isn't enough room to show you. There is a little bit of machine embroidery here, okay? And then these cork pieces were cut and stitched together. Now, if you've ever tried to do cork and have nice flat seams and so on, it's pretty challenging to do. So what I have done is I cut out the pieces with no seam allowance and then stitch them using a double zigzag, which is a decorative stitch, to secure everything in place with a colored thread. So that's a very cool way of using it, and it prevents you from having all those lumpy stitches in with your cork product. Okay, so here is a sample, and I think most of you are probably familiar with this. This is the traditional stitches that people will use if they're doing applique. We have our satin stitch out here, and we have the applique stitch or a blanket or buttonhole, and I'll just zoom in so you can see that a little bit better. So satin stitch here around the edge, and then that's the applique or the buttonhole. And there are, if you look at your machines, there are several different styles of this, and we have several preset widths of the satin stitch. Now you can also use let me just get this in the right way here. So you could also use your decorative stitches for quilting. So this is the side of a tote bag. Again, I don't have a lot of room to share with you on the screen the whole project, but it is pieced together with 5-inch or charm squares. Okay. And then a lot of people, because I remember when I first started to quilt, everybody said to me, oh, you know what, if you just do stitch in the ditch, it's going to be perfect. Well, stitch in the ditch is really hard. So what I've done here is just use a serpentine stitch with a variegated thread, and I get a really nice element on my bag that is extremely easy to do. So instead of using the same old, why not look at using some of those stitches on your machine? Here is a little postcard Again, the postcard, it's done in sewing mode. I've just sewn some little bits together and then use the same decorative stitch to just cover the edges. So it's kind of like a crazy patch quilt. And here's another example with that same concept. So this is a journal cover. And we'll just zoom out here a little bit. Whoops, zooming the wrong way. So this is a journal cover. And again, I've just taken scraps of fabric, sewed them together, and then just used a variety of decorative stitches on the machine to give it a little bit of oomph. Now, I will confess that I am one of those people who tends to use very non-contrasting threads. So I have a lot of orange on orange fabric, and so it's sometimes a little bit hard to see. So if that's something that happens to you, then you know what, you may want to change that up a little bit. But it just is a great way to add a little bit of punch to whatever you're working on.
Elaine?
Yes.
Could you show the button stitch, the blanket stitches again? Somebody wanted to know if that was doubled.
Okay. Let's just zoom in here. And yes, so this blanket stitch is actually one of the, I believe it's actually called reinforced or something, or a double. And so it is actually stitching twice on the little jog on the inside, and then it will stitch once across. If you look in your, depends on which machine that you have, but if you look at the B menu or the applique menu, depending, there are some stitches that will do in here double, and there are some of the stitches, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, that will actually do 2 stitches in between each jog, whereas this one is doing a reinforce. So every time it does this, it basically is a complete double stitch, but sometimes your stitch has got, or the applique stitch has 2 stitches in between. And so it's a good idea to try all of them to see which one that you like, because there are great options. And don't forget with any of your stitches, and I'm going to mention this multiple times, but with any of your stitches that you are able to change the length and the width of them. So that's really important. Don't just use the default. You have lots of options to use difference. Okay. All right. Now, another use for decorative stitches. Again, all of this is done in sewing mode. Here is a table runner. And what I have done on this is I have used a decorative stitch, and let's just zoom in a little bit there so you can see better. I have used a decorative stitch on this binding. Now, this is not the stitch that sewed the binding to the table runner. Okay, if I peek at the back, you do not see that stitch on the back. So how did I do that? Well, here's a little sample. So here is the binding. And what I did was I folded this binding in half, pressed it, and then I, with my red thread or whatever decorative thread, I picked a stitch and I stitched this right along the fold. Now, in hindsight, what happened is when I got to the end and was putting the binding on and wanted to do that final join, well, that became a little bit of a challenge because I wasn't able to open that binding as I wanted, because that stitching was holding it in place. So that didn't kind of work so well. If I had to do it again, I would fold the binding in half, and then I would put a stabilizer underneath, and then I would stitch this, remove the stabilizer, and then fold it in half and then apply it. But it's a really nice way of just adding an embellishment to your binding. All right, here's another example. Again, I apologize because this one is probably very difficult to see. We might have to zoom in. Let's just see if I can find the stitches in the camera here. Oh yeah, so here we have the stitches. So this again is a tote bag, and it's looks like sand with people's feet walking in it. And as I was doing the quilting, I took one of the kind of fly stitches or feather stitch and just stitched along here. Now, next time I'm going to make them in a little bit higher contrast so that we can actually see what's happening. But it's a great way. Now, it's, again, hard to see on the camera, but the first time that I did this, I actually just stitched the decorative stitch in a straight row right across. And I thought, That's not what birds do when they're on the beach. So I just took my fabric and just started to twist and turn like this very gently as I was stitching to get a kind of serpentine line of decorative stitches in my fabric. So don't feel that you have to stitch everything in a perfectly straight line. You do not. Okay. You can gently, I say, steer your fabric left and right to give it a bit of a curvy motion in it. Now that's going to depend also on the decorative stitch. Okay. So you're going to have to play with that a little bit. All right. We have this one here. So again, as a change up from your typical satin or applique stitch, this one here is one of the satin stitches, but it's a little bit different because one of the edges is flat or straight, and the inside edge is kind of like a long and short stitch. The shadows that I get on this particular one on the piece are absolutely gorgeous, and it just adds a little bit of element and more depth or excitement than just putting a regular satin stitch on it. And then this piece here was also a decorative stitch that I put on, and and it just looks so much nicer than if it was just a satin stitch. We have, don't worry, we will get to embroidery, but I just want to get you inspired by this. Here's another table runner. This was done with the circular attachment, and this is a candle wicking stitch. Candle wicking stitch is beautiful. It's nice and short, so it allows you to, have your start and stop look pretty neat. But we have that. Here is a pair of child's shorts, and I wanted to add a decorative stitch to the bottom of them. So I chose a stitch that wasn't super dense. And then the question became, do I put a stabilizer on this or not? Because most times when you're doing a decorative stitch, if you don't have binding in the back, or not binding, sorry, if you don't have batting in the back of it, you have to put some kind of a stabilizer on. So what I did on this case is I've actually stitched on the hem. So that meant that I didn't have to put stabilizer on it. But if I had to move that stitch up just a little bit so it's only on the one layer of denim, I would definitely have had to put a stabilizer in. I am not going to go down the stabilizer road because we don't have time, but keep in mind that there are 4 types of stabilizers, and they are basically how you will remove the stabilizer from your product. You have your tear away, cut away, water soluble, and heat away. So make sure that you understand what stabilizers are there, because it is really important. But cute little way to dress up a pair of shorts. Now here's something a little bit different. So this is applique, and I have not used a satin stitch to close the edges off, or an applique stitch. So this is one of the decorative stitches in the machine. And what you want to be careful when you are doing something like this, especially if you have to go around curves, you want to make sure that you understand where the stitch sequence ends, because that is where you want to pivot. You do not want to pivot in the middle of a stitch sequence. That is just not good. So you're going to have to do a little bit of practicing with some of them. All right, I'm going to have to move on because I just two more things to show you in sewing mode, and then we're going to move on to embroidery. All right, so here we go. This is a little pillow, and this was done with the Omni stitches that you'll find on the larger machines like the Epics. So this is one of the stitches. That is one stitch. And then you have the little snowflake that's on the side here. Again, that is one stitch, but just repeated 3 times. And you can do, so you can make nice little things. And then this is a little tag that I made using, there was a bicycle stitch in the machine. There we go. And so what I did was I had stitched this out on grosgrain ribbon, and the bicycle, I had it programmed so that the bicycle went in one direction, and then there was a spacing stitch, and then the bicycle went in the opposite direction. And just because I like bicycles, so that just became a little signature tag that I put into my pieces, which is really quite fun. All right, now the other thing that I want to just talk about before we move on, and this is going to be, I think, really hard for you guys to see on the camera, but we'll try. Let me just find it here. Okay, there it is right there. It is a little bit difficult, but what I sometimes do is we have built-in fonts, and the built-in fonts are basically decorative stitches as well. And so on some of my quilts, when I'm have lots of blocks, I like to put the name of the block on the sashing for that. And so that is written right here. Again, you cannot see because the thread that I used is very much the same color, but it is a great way to keep the name of the block with the quilt. So you can't read it, I can read it, but I didn't want it to be very noticeable either. So just, something to keep in mind when you are doing that. Okay. All right. So basically decorative stitches can be used in so many different ways and so many different places. And it really is, just a question of saying, I'm going to get out of my box and I'm going to try something different. Okay, so before we move over to embroidery, let's just have a quick peek at the Onyx 30. So here is the Husqvarna Viking Onyx 30. And I apologize, but my camera, I bought a new camera. I'm like, oh, I was all excited about it, and I cannot get the thing to focus properly. So I realized that these pictures are slightly fuzzy, and which is kind of a shame, because what I really wanted to show you with this entry-level machine is how clear and bright and how big the lettering is on this screen. So as you are choosing your stitch, it's great because I can very clearly see the foot that I need, the stitch, the needle position, the width or the length or any of that kind of stuff. So it is a great screen and super, super clear. But what happens with a lot of machines in sewing mode is you're like, well, I got decorative stitches, but you know what? I have to get the user's guide out, and I don't want to do that. Well, what the Onyx 30 has are these little stitch charts that just slide out from the bottom here. And there are 3 of them. And so depending on what menu of stitches that I want to look at, they're right here. So I want to choose a decorative stitch. I just pop this open. I look at the stitch or the buttonhole or, whatever it is that I want. And then I can just come up to the screen and make that change. So that is super, super exciting in this machine. And it stitches really, really nice. The other thing, I don't know if you can really notice it on the camera, but look at the profile of this machine. This is, if you noticed, or if you have an Epic 3, this is the same profile as the Designer Epic 3, which is really kind of cool. So anyways, but again, I apologize for the focus on that, but it's great. And the Onyx has over 150 decorative stitches on it, which is very cool. Okay. So now what we're going to talk about before we move over to the Epic 3 is we're going to talk about why, if everything stitches out fine in sewing mode, why would I want to bring my stitches into embroidery? And that's a very good question. And so here I have some samples that I'm going to share with you. And we'll just get these out. We're actually going to move over to our camera again and look at some samples. So here are a couple of little applique circles, and these were all done in sewing mode, and they look great because the stitch length on them is very short. So it doesn't matter if the stitch is exactly matches up with, the end of the sequence matches up with the beginning sequence, because the stitch sequence or the length is short. It's really only 1 stitch. So no big deal. But what happens when we choose a stitch like this? All right, and let's just zoom in and have a peek here. So you can see as it went around, everything is going great until I get right back to the beginning. The stitch length or the sequence does not exactly match up. Now that might be okay, but it just means that there's some stitches that I'm probably just not going to use. As I showed you with the candle wicking stitch on that pink heart, the candle wicking stitch is short, so it's easy to fudge it when it gets back to the beginning. But it is hard on something like this. Now here is an example of a stitch that was done on, so this applique was done in embroidery mode. It's a little hard to see on here just because of the color. Again, I'm very good at matching my colors, which I need to, for samples, I have to stop doing that. But it is a satin stitch, and it goes all the way around, and it looks great. Again, the stitch length is really short, so it really doesn't make a big difference. But Let's look at this one. So here we have a little bit different stitch, and we're actually going to look at the back because it's easier to see from the back. This is one of the default stitches you'll see in a second. We're going to talk about this. So if I had have tried to do this in sewing mode, it would have been a lot more complicated. And would the end match up with the beginning? Good chance it wasn't going to. But because I did it in Embroidery Edit, guess what? The software in the Designer Epic 3 did all the hard work for me. So it lines up perfect. And that's one of the reasons why you would want to use your decorative stitches in embroidery mode. Now, another reason is, let's say that you are doing something like this. So this is a little bit of quilting on a little zippered pouch. And I've used, again, the one of the serpentine stitches, okay? You'll notice that not all the intersections are the same. I did it in sewing mode, and it was a bit of a challenge to do. I could have if I wanted to, but it would have taken a long time. And here is another example. Now, this is done in sewing mode, and it is one of the satin stitches. This took forever to line up, and it is not perfect. There's a couple of places where there's, a couple of little boo-boos and so on, but this took forever to stitch in sewing mode. If I had have put this into embroidery mode, it wouldn't have taken very long at all, okay? Now here's another example, and this was stitched out on the Onyx 30. So I have 3 rows of decorative stitching up here and 3 at the bottom on the other side as well. And the intention was to have the points meet each other. And you can see that they're off a little bit, partially operator error. I had also put fusible fleece on the underside of this. So it, there were a couple of instances where it didn't necessarily feed as nicely as I would have liked into the machine. But it's a little bit harder to get everything exactly lined up when you're in sewing mode. There's a lot of factors that come into play. So I replicated this design in embroidery mode, and look at this. So those stitches are perfectly lined up. I couldn't find the same stitch for the center, but those points are perfectly lined up. It was easy to do in Embroidery Edit. So that is one of the reasons why, if you have an embroidery machine, that you want to take those decorative stitches over, because you can do so much and they will be perfectly lined up, where in sewing mode, they're not always perfect. Okay. All right. And I did a bunch of these stitches. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'll just show you one for just to show. So when I first got an Epic a number of years ago, I stitched out all of the specialty stitch techniques. So this is the sequence stitches. This was done in embroidery mode. Yes, you can do your sequence stitches. You can do all of those wide omni-motion stitches. You can do, let me see what else we have here. The yarn stitches. We have the some of the dimensional stitches. Okay, these are all sewing stitches, but this was all done in embroidery mode. Those lines are perfectly straight. I'm going to show you how to do that today. Okay. And then just a couple of other samples here. And this is one of my, let me just get this up here. One of my favorites. This is one of the omni stitches. And it's kind of like the herringbone stitch sort of thing. There is no way that I would have been able to get these stitches exactly lined up. So each one of the stitches, it's kind of hard to see, but it is just like a whoops, sorry, my hand's in the way there. It is a herringbone. And because I had created a line of decorative stitching of those herringbones, I was able to snug them together right on the edit screen of my embroidery machine and just stitch it out. So I have this beautiful texture now that I'm going to use for the side of a pouch. So this is why you want to be using your decorative stitches. And then here's, again, just another example. Sometimes the omni-motion stitches, hopefully you guys, if you have them on your machine, that you have actually tried them. And these stitches are wide. These are not 9mm wide stitches. These are wider, and they're called sideways stitches. So your machine moves sideways. Well, guess what? It is really hard to get them perfectly lined up. But if you bring them into embroidery mode, they're perfectly lined up because they just become a stitch point in an embroidery. Super easy to keep them straight. And then the last one that I have, if I haven't convinced you now, hopefully this one will, or you'll be a little bit more convinced. So this here was a triple stitch that I used, and I created a grid in embroidery, and then I brought in an embroidery design into each one of the pieces. So lots of reasons why you would want to bring your, lots of reasons why you would want to bring those embroidery stitches, decorative stitches into embroidery mode, because you can do so many amazing things and it's going to be perfect. Yes, you can do it in sewing mode. Like I said, this one here was done in sewing mode, but it took an awful lot of time in order to make it happen. All right, so let us think what we're going to do is we are going to go over to, let me just see. Yeah, we're going to go over to the Epic, and we're going to have a look at how to make this happen. All right, let me just move over here. All right, now I realize that some of you might not be able to see the screen like super close. I mean, we have to keep in mind that this is not a demo that I'm doing. It's really just to give you that inspiration and hopefully the excitement of what you can do with your decorative stitches in embroidery. So, all right. And you can always go back and watch the video if you need to. All right. So I am in Embroidery Edit. Okay. And you will notice we have our little menu here that we are going to be able to input designs in. And, you have your designs, you have fonts, you have this zigzag thing. What the heck is that? Well, guess what? That is where we can input decorative stitches into Embroidery Edit, which is really, really cool. And then you can bring it in from a file and, all other kinds of stuff like that. But we're just going to work with stitches that are internal to the Epic 3. So first thing that I can do is I would just pop open that, and guess what happens? I now have access to the entire stitch menu that I would have if I were in sewing mode. So I can just scroll through, and this will be different depending on the machine that you have. So I can scroll through all of those menus, go into each one of the submenus, and whatever stitch that I like, I can use. Now I'm going to use, just because it's easier for you to at least see something on the screen, I am going to use the scallop stitch a lot, just because, like I said, it is easy. So here I have this particular stitch on the screen, and you'll notice that an option opened up on the bottom called Create Sequence. Now, what I can do is I'm always good at touching things, and then I forget to tell you what I did. So I brought up a single stitch. I'm going to touch and hold that, and it brings up my little menu on the screen that says, do you want to edit that in sequence? And sequence, what they've done with the Designer Epic 3 is they have given some of the functions a different name. So sequence is actually programming. So if you have one of the other machines, it's programming, it's the same thing. So we're going to edit in sequence. And what this does now is this is moving me to the function with, it's basically a subset of Embroidery Edit, which is called Create Sequence. And at the top of my screen is that scallop stitch that I brought up. So if I want to just make an entire row of that stitch, I have my duplicate tool down here, and I can just select that duplicate tool to bring in as many of those stitches as I would like. Now, let's say you don't know how many you want. Well, up here at the top, it's going to tell me, well, first, actually, let's go down here. I have the length of the stitch and I have the width. Okay, that's the default in the machine. So I've added 4 in. It's telling me that the total length of that sequence that I've just created is 84 millimeters. Now, the one thing, if we're in sewing mode, we're not restricted by the length of our hoop because we don't have a hoop. But in embroidery mode, we are. So if I were using, the new Epic 3, the 465 height hoop, I could continue to add stitches up to 465. Now, if I go over, I'll have to back off a little bit because it's not always going to perfectly fit in. So that is so I want to watch that number to see what's happening. Now, there is the last stitch, or in this case, the last stitch is highlighted. And so you can see it's a little bit different color than the others are. And that means that I would be able to edit that stitch and change the width or change the length of the one that is selected. Now, it's not always a good idea to do that, or you have to be careful how much you do that, because if the connection between one and the other isn't nice, it may not be something that you want, but you have that option to do so. So we're just going to bring that back up to its original size and its original length. Whoops, I've gone over now. Wasn't paying attention. Okay, there, 21. The other option that I have is I can mirror that stitch side to side. So you see it mirrored it in the opposite direction, but now I have a very not so pretty connection between the base of that one and the base of this one. So that might not be a good thing to make that happen. Okay, so you always want to watch the screen. And we have other options within here that you can do as well. If I need to move up, and let's say that I wanted to change the stitch above, well, this is telling me that in my sequence, I have 5 stitches because I've got a tie off in there somewhere, I'm guessing, or I have a join, and I can, excuse me, I can move up or down, and then I can modify that stitch that is selected. So I can create any sequence. And if I wanted to bring in, we're just going to go back down here to the bottom one. And if I wanted to add in a different stitch, well, up here in the top, or wherever that menu is, because it could be a different place on your screen, I'm going to go back into here. And let's say we'll just pop in that stitch, close that menu, and it brought in 2 of those new stitches. So I can create any sequence that I want. It doesn't have to be the same type of stitch. It doesn't have to be from the same menu. It can be one of the stitch techniques. It can be anything. So my stitch sequence can be whatever I like. And if I get to the bottom and I feel like I want to modify some of them, make them a little bit shorter because it doesn't quite fit into my hoop, well, guess what? I can actually go in and do that. Now, before you make an entire line of this and then realize, oh, you know what, if I had made it 1 stitch shorter, or 1 millimeter shorter each stitch, it would have fit into that hoop. You might want to do that calculation first and say, okay, I'm using the 465 hoop. My stitch length is 21. 465 divided by 21. Oh yeah, okay. And you can make the change. Once you make a global change, then it will, a change, it'll change all. You can go in and make them globally as well if you'd like. So lots and lots of options that you can go in and you can change your stitches, add, subtract, whatever it is that you want to do. Once I'm happy with it, then I would go in and I can add in tie-offs and so on. Once I'm happy with it, at the top, I have a red X or I have a green check mark. If I'm happy with it, I can select the check mark. If I want to start over, I can select the red X. I'll check the check mark, and I can do the check mark. You'll notice over here in this menu also that I have fonts that I can add. And if I have a file with some stuff in it, I could also add that to my sequence. So we're just going to select the green check mark. It's going to take me back into Embroidery Edit with all my editing tools. And there is that line of stitching. And now I can just position it wherever I would like. If I want to duplicate that particular sequence, I can duplicate it. If I want to mirror it side to side because I want to push it over here like so, I can do that. And so I can now create a whole bunch of very cool things. All right. So it is huge what you can do. And I want to just share a couple of things with you before we move on. So we're just going to come back over here. So here is a sample that, whoops, just sorry, you need to go to the sample camera. So here we have this is a scallop stitch, high contrast thread, so you can actually see what's happening in it, which is great. And so I started off with one of the scallop stitches. I brought that into the create sequence. I replicated it so that it would fit into the size of the hoop that I was using. And then I duplicated that row and created this row of satin stitch. And then I positioned it however I liked. If I can use the X and Y axis on my screen if I wanted to get it more precise. And then I duplicated it again and added in a third row. And then I selected all and duplicated that and then mirrored it to get the other half. So now I'm able to snug the two halves in together so that these scallop stitches are kind of forming like a little bubble, which is perfect. Okay. So this is the kind of thing that you can do by bringing those decorative stitches into embroidery mode. I could definitely have done this in sewing mode. Absolutely. But it would have taken a lot of concentration and a lot of kind of fudging to make sure that everything was precisely lined up and precisely straight. So this is huge. Okay, so now let's go back to the Epic 3 because I'm going to show you a couple of other features in the embroidery edit that are fabulous to use with decorative stitching. I'm going to go here. Okay. All right, so let's get rid of that off of our screen. Okay. All right. So now what I had done the first time was I had brought in a decorative stitch, and that highlighted the create sequence, meaning if I touched and hold my design or my stitch, it would take me into create sequence. I can also start by just going into create sequence. So I can just select that and then pull in. So you see there's no stitches up here. I can then just pull in whatever stitch or font or file that I'm working with. Okay, so not a problem. Now the one thing that we didn't do, and I'm just going to bring in a couple of stitches just really, really quickly to show you here. We'll just bring in, I like that, again, that scallop only because it's very easy to see on the screen. Okay, so we'll duplicate that a couple of times. All right, that's what I want. I'm happy with that. I can save it. All right, so by saving it, it is actually taking me to, well, it says my Sonnet, which we all know now is Creative 8. And this is my space for within my Sonnet, which would allow me to put that on. And just to remind everyone, when I am saving a file, if it is a stitch that I have edited or I've created, so I would say that it is my scallop stitch. So that was what, C.1, 0.2 or whatever, I forget what the numbers were, then I could go over here and that's what I would call it. All right. Now, if you are it's always going to bring you up at the end, and you can use these keys down here, which will take you back to wherever you need to change the name, or you can use your delete key and retype the whole thing. But just know that there are different functions on that keyboard for saving, but you can save your sequence so that you could always bring it in later. You might just have designed it today, but you don't have time to actually stitch it. So save it, give it a name that you're going to recognize, try to put it into some kind of a folder, makes it easier to find, and then you're good to go. All right, so let's just get out of here. And we're going to get out of there. So that is two ways to get into the create sequence or programming if you have a non-Epic 3 machine. Now we have two other, well, I'm going to just tell you this. I'm not going to go in because it's not that it's complex, but I don't want to get into it today. We don't have time. But there is another feature, and this is only on the Epic 3 at this point, It is called Stitch Creator. So if you find a decorative stitch that you absolutely love, but there's some little thing in there that you want to change, or you want to add a little detail to it, with Stitch Creator, it allows you to modify most of the 9mm wide stitches and add or subtract components to it. So that is huge. So whatever, over 800 plus decorative stitches in the Epic 3, you now have an infinite number of stitches that you can use. So that is Stitch Creator, but that's another whole topic. All right. We have a couple of other tools on the bottom here. We have something called Create Shape. On the older, well, I shouldn't say older machines, but on the other machines, it is called, I believe it's called Design Shape or something like that. I've forgotten the terminology, but I believe that's what it is. What that does, I'm still in Embroidery Edit, but it has taken me to a new screen, a subset called Create Shape. I have two options here. I can go into Shapes, and it brings up a couple of menus. There's a couple of options within here, and it also brings up letter shapes, and I have outlines or I have solids. So I have the option to use whichever one that I want. And for this purpose, we're actually going to pick just a shape. We are going to pick let's pick a circle to start with. Okay. And we're going to close that. Now, what I want to do, sorry, again, I get happy with my touching the screen. This has brought up a circle. I can go in and I'll be able to change the size, and I would make it the size that I want. I'm okay with that based on the hoop that I've used. I'm going to bring in a stitch. Again, I am going to select my satin stitch, and I'm going to close that. So if you can see, it has brought up one of those satin stitches at the bottom of the circle. Okay. I would like that satin stitch to go all the way around. So down here, I can continue to highlight that stitch until it fills the circle or as full as I would like, or by touching and holding the number in the center between the plus and the minus, a keyboard pops up. So I would be able to type in, let's say 20, and it now filled that circle with 20 of that satin stitch. If I wanted more, I could always add by the plus, or I could subtract by using the minus. Okay. Now, and you can rotate and you can scale, the usual tools that you have in Edit. But we have something that's very cool down here called positioning. And if we open this up, because you look at that and you don't really think anything of it, you think that's just part of what I'm doing. And in fact, it's not. So we're going to open up that menu. And there are a lot of ways that I can reposition those satin stitches on that circle. So the angle is the first one. And right now the stitches are following the contour of the shape that I have created. If I select the next one, it changes the angle, so they're all now in a horizontal position, which is very cool. Okay, we're going to go back to this just because it's easier to show. I also have position, and what this is doing is currently that stitch, the center of that stitch is sitting on that center of that line. It's sitting right on the line. But let's say that I want that satin stitch to sit inside that circle. That's what that button does. If I select the next one, it moves the satin stitch to the outside of that line. So I can change it up however I like. By using this Create Shape multiple times, I can create mandalas, I can create all kinds of things that I have, and I can use almost all of the decorative stitches, the 800 plus decorative stitches, I can use them. I could even use some of the fonts if I wanted to. I could even use an embroidery design if I wanted to. We're not touching embroidery designs today. We just want to use decorative stitches. Now, I also am able to rotate that particular design. So currently it's in the position that it came in. This here, it's flipping it kind of on an end. This one is flipping it in the opposite direction to what it was originally, so that the flat end is now on the circle. And this one will have it flipping in the opposite way. It's a little hard to see because it's a symmetrical design, but we have that. So we'll just keep it back at the beginning. Actually, I like that shape. Okay. Now, the other thing that we can do, we have what's called distribution. So right now they are evenly distributed, which is probably what I want, but let's say that I don't. I can justify them all into one area on the right-hand side. I can justify them to the top, or I can justify them onto the other side. So they will all group together instead of being evenly spaced. Back to evenly spaced, and the software does all what I need. If I had chosen one of these, and let's say they were just a little bit too tight, too close together, I can open up that spacing, and that will actually, this will move it around. So you have a spacing tool in there as well. And then we also have something which is called contour points. And contour points is kind of cool because, let me just see here if I can, okay, so contour points are these little red dots, which you probably cannot see, but I am going to get out of that positioning tool and I'm going to rotate that design. And you see what happens? It takes those 4 contour points, or I could add more if I wanted, and it will completely distort and give me a brand new complete design. So there are so many tools within just create shape and using your decorative stitches that the number of designs that you can create, you should never have to buy an embroidery motif in your life again, because you can create them right on your edit screen. It is absolutely phenomenal. It just blows me away. The more that I play with it, I just think, oh my gosh, like it's crazy. And I could rotate them, by 90 degrees or any angle that I want, and, and so on. So we have lots of super, super things. And just one little quick reminder to all of you, if there is a function on the screen, and this is on, I believe, all the machines back to, Topaz, in the Topaz line, I'm pretty sure, and above. But if there is a function on the screen and you have no idea what it is, and it's 2:00 in the morning and there is nobody to ask, don't forget you've got your quick help up here. Quick help, in the case of the Epic 3, it is pulsing. I select a key down here. It's going to say, oh, that is a repeat combination. If I want to learn more about that, guess what? I'm going to select this. It's going to take me to the user's guide and give me more information about it. So be curious with your machine. You want to go in. If you don't know what a function is, don't just say, well, that's okay. Maybe I'll wait for a dealer class, or I'll wait till I take a class and then I'll ask the instructor. No, this is your personalized instructor. That little quick help, honestly, is huge. And as an educator, I use it because there are times when I'm like, you know what? I can't remember what the heck that does. And so I use it, and then I can always quickly go into the user's guide. So super, super way of going in and playing with it. Okay, so we don't want to do that. We are going to delete that. We have to get out of create shape, and we're going to get out of here. And that brought that design in. Now you'll notice that there were some lines in behind. Those are just design lines. Those are not stitching lines. So it's just going to come out in this weird shape, which isn't, doesn't really make sense for the design that I had created. So we're going to get rid of that. I just want to show you one other thing in that tool before we move on. In Create Shape, you also have let's go here. You have a line. So we're going to open up the line. This brings up a straight line. Let's say that you want to emphasize something in your design. You just want like a nice little break between one piece and another. Well, guess what? This is a straight line, not a circle, not a square, but a straight line. I'm going to open up my stitch, bring up, again, I'm bringing this up just because it's easy to see on the screen for you guys. And there is I don't know why it keeps defaulting. Anyways, it brings up the big hoop. We'll change that in a second. I am going to add more of this. All right, and we're just going to delete a couple of those. Sorry, I'm going to move to a different hoop in a second. We are okay with that. And let's just get out of that big hoop and into I'm not sure why that is happening. I noticed it happened earlier today and I was like, must be me doing something. So now I have just a straight line of those scallops. So it's super, super, super easy to create any shape. And you saw how we can distort it by selecting the contour points and then just rotating them. So I do have a sample to show you. So let me just get over here. So this is a sample that I made. And for anybody who is familiar with and let me just see if I can find it really quickly here. Just checking. It is always a challenge to find because there's so many of these omni motion stitches. It's always a challenge to find the one. Oh, here we go. All right. So here are the omni motion stitches. So these are those wider than 9 millimeters. They're sideways stitches. Absolutely love them. And they are perfect, especially for bringing into the embroidery mode because they're big. So they can fill up a space quickly. So here is one of the hearts. So this heart has just been replicated in a straight line that I showed you. And then here I used that create shape and created a circle. And then I created some straight lines or created a box and then had those stitches in here and created, whoops, going the wrong way. And so now I have this great design that is actually been made into a cushion. Okay. I'm never good with the direction of this camera, and I should mark a big X on my table so that I know where things need to go. All right. Anyway, you get the idea. So taking a single stitch, you can very quickly create your own designs. If I had wanted, this could have been an embroidery design, and I just filled the space around it. I didn't have to, I didn't have to just create with a stitch. All right. Now we have one other tool that I want to show you. So let's go back to that in our edit and see what that is all about. I need to get my pen here.
Elaine, before you move on, can I pass you along a couple of questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so the first one is somebody wants to know if you can save your designs on a USB stick.
Absolutely.
Yes. Excellent.
Yeah.
And also, can you combine, and I think this question was asked while you were in the create shape, can you combine stitches and letters in the same combination of stitches?
Yes. So one thing I will just go back to the save is when I was in saving my file, I don't have a USB in the Designer Epic 3. That's why the option didn't come up. But if I had a USB attached to it, right, then I would get the option of going into Creative 8 or into the USB. So yes, you can. When it comes to creating a stitch sequence, I have access to anything. I can add in a little embroidery design. And we usually, when you're working with embroidery designs, you probably want to use the small or they're in the mini menu, but you can add the stitching fonts and you can add in stitches. So you have the menu, the menu is there. You just go in and select what you want. Yes.
Excellent. So one more question here is somebody is saying that she did a circle of decorative stitches. It was ladybugs. After every ladybug stitched, it trimmed and asked for a color change. And she wants to know, how do you get rid of those stops and trims when you are doing a series of decorative stitches like that?
Okay. So one of the things that you can do when you are moving from embroidery edit into embroidery stitch out, and let's just actually go back over here and have a, whoops, not that one here. So for instance, in this one here, so I have multiple, it's the same stitch, it's the same color. How I could avoid that is when I move from embroidery edit to embroidery stitch out, I have the option to make it monochrome. And if I make it monochrome, then it's just going to stitch the whole thing out in one color. So I have the ability to do that. Okay. The other option that I have is I can use the sort tool. So I've got color sort and color merge or monochrome, which is the third option. And if I wanted to, because if I had multiple colors, but I want to the same. Well, I don't want to get too complicated with this, but understand your color sort and your color merge, because when you have color sort, what it will do is it's going to put all the same color. It will stitch all the same colors one after another. But it will still have a color stop. If you do color sort and color merge, then it will remove the color stops between like colors. Hopefully that makes sense. So color stop, color merge, make sure that you know how to use them. Color stop groups them, but does not remove the stop. Color merge will remove the stop, the color stop. Okay. All right. Any other questions, Amy? We're good?
I think we're good. Yep.
Okay. All right. Super. All right. Got one last thing to show you because I know we're running out of time. As usual. Okay. So here we are just going to delete this off the screen. So what we have is the other tool is called Create Applique. And again, it was called Applique, Design Applique or something. It's funny how quickly you forget these tools. So again, it's bringing up a Create Applique. This is a subset of Embroidery Edit. Over here, I have two tools, shapes and fonts. So we will bring up the shape. I have my choice. I'm just going to do a circle, just make this really easy. I'm going to close this. It brought up, so remember, this is applique. So it's going to automatically create a placement stitch, a tack down stitch, and then it's going to want to finish the edge. And you have options in how to finish that edge. So there is, and I think this is, well, this isn't new to the Epic 3, but the, I can't go back all the machines because I can't remember off the top of my head, but you would have found there would be a little menu down here, and I believe it had 6 stitches in the past, six pre-autofill stitches. Now we will open up this menu, and I have 17 of the most common stitches that people like to use to finish off their applique edges. So if I wanted to use there's candle wicking, so I could select, well, candle wicking was the default. Let's use these little hearts. Actually, let's use these circles because they probably will show up better. And I close that autofill menu, and there is my applique with that little heart all the way around. Now, if I did not want to use any of the 17 stitches in autofill, guess what? I could go in to either pick an embroidery design if I wanted, and again, I'd pick the small ones in the mini or the end menu, but I'm going to open up the stitches. We'll go back into that satin stitch, pick that scallop, and now I have the option down here, same as we had before, where I can fill it in, or I can open this up and let's say put 20 in there. And now the fill, or the outside edge, or the edge that's going to finish my applique, is this scallop. And this is going to create an applique with that decorative stitch around the edge. All my positioning tools are down here as well. So depending on how I want them to sit, the same options that we had in the shape menu, we have in the applique menu. So there's the distribution, the position, the rotation, the control points, the angle, all of that is in there. And, you can scale it. You can do, a lot of different things with it. Because I know we're running out of time, I have a couple of samples I just want to share so that you get an idea of what that is and why you would want to use it. So here is, let me just bring this in here. So here is, just a sec, get that to the right orientation for you. Well, it doesn't really matter. It's just, it is a letter. But down here, you can see where I have used a line. Okay, so this was the shape, and I have just brought in a little mini embroidery design that I just placed along here. I definitely used my color sort and merge tools here because I did not want to change thread after every flower, so that's very important. And then here is one of the appliques, and there, that's a little better. Okay, so here is the applique, and it does have Sorry, it's going the wrong way on the Zoom. So you can see that there is a candle wicking stitch that covers the edge. So this is, just to show you what that is for the applique. And then in the center of this is the letter E. So this is just a shape. It's only stitched that particular stitch around all of the lettering. So that's just an example actually on this one here of both of them. So what you have is your create applique, which is right here. And then you have your create shape, which forms the letter E. And then you have the line, which creates this line of embroidery down here. And this was all done in either create shape or create applique. And this one last sample, because you might be saying, well, why would I use that? Well, this is a very busy piece of fabric. And let's say that I want to make a monogram on it. Well, guess what? If I were to just stitch, and this is thread velvet, by the way, so I haven't finished cutting it open. If I were to just stitch those letters onto this background fabric, they wouldn't show. They would be lost. So I used a create shape and created an oval and then stitched my applique on top of it. And now I have this really nice monogram that I can use for my embroidery to put on, anything. So just know that those tools are super, super cool to play with. The options are endless. And I have one last thing. Sorry, this is it. This is the absolute last thing. We are not going into the Creative 8 embroidery software, but I just wanted to let you know that when you are in that Creative 8 embroidery software, used to be my Sonnet, it's now called Creative 8, that you can use the decorative stitches. They are called motifs in the software, but this is one of the single scallop stitches. And I was able to use the Quilt Block Wizard and bring that in and create that embroidery design that is, and this is actually quilted. It's gone through all the layers, but I've created a quilt pattern using my decorative stitches in embroidery. And the same with this one here. This one is a loop stitch. I don't remember which stitch it is, but it is a decorative stitch. Again, I created that in the Quilt Block Wizard in the Creative 8 embroidery software, and that creates a quilting image or quilting design that went through all of my layers. So quilting, or not quilting, but using your decorative stitches in embroidery mode. I mean, you can use them in sewing mode, 100%. But boy, oh boy, can you have a lot of fun using your decorative stitches in embroidery mode. And all I can say is that you absolutely need to get your user's guide out. Here's the user's guide. If you don't know, you need to get the user's guide out for whatever sewing or embroidery machine that you are using, because there is a ton of information in there. If you're not into paper, keep in mind that the user's guide is built in to a lot of our machines now, or you can actually have it on your app. I forgot about that. You can have it on your app or your smart device, whatever. So anyway, well, that is all that I have. I hope, Amy, are there any other questions before we go? I should ask you that.
I think you got everything here. Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, I just wanted to thank all of you for coming today. It has been a lot of fun. It's always fun for me. For those people that know me, they know I am super passionate about sewing and embroidery and quilting. And I'm just happy to share with you my inspirations and my samples and so on. And hopefully you're now going to go and spend some time with decorative stitches in your embroidery machine. Thank you so much.